Hello. My name is Mark Lococo. I'm the director of theater here at Loyola. I'll be reading the Reverend Everly Thomas this evening. I'm joined by my colleagues, Professor Jonathan Wilson, who will be reading Hans Vollmann, and Ross Lehman, who will be reading Roger Bevins III. We're also joined by two theater students, Audrey Anderson and Max Gustafson. This is section 20 through 24.
The unkempt gentleman was fussing over the small form now, stroking the hair, patting and rearranging the pale, doll-like hands.
As the lad stood nearby, uttering many urgent entreaties for his father to look his way, fuss over him.
Which the gentleman appeared not to hear.
Then this already troubling and unseemly display descended to a new level.
We heard an intake of breath from the Reverend, who, appearance notwithstanding, is not easily shocked.
He is going to pick that child up, the Reverend said.
And so he did. The man lifted the tiny form out of the
sick box.
The man bent, lifted the tiny form from the box, and with surprising grace for one so ill-made, sat all at once on the floor, gathering it into his lap.
Sinking his head into the place between chin and neck, the gentleman sobbed, raggedly at first, then unreservedly, giving full vent to his emotions.
While the lad darted back and forth nearby, in an apparent agony of frustration.
For nearly 10 minutes, the man held the
sick form.
The boy, frustrated at being denied the attention he felt he deserved, moved in and leaned against his father as the father continued to hold and gently rock the
sick form.
At one point, moved, I turned away from the scene and found we were not alone.
A crowd had gathered outside.
All were silent
as the man continued to gently rock his child.
While his child simultaneously stood quietly leaning against him.
Then the gentleman began to speak.
The lad threw one arm familiarly around his father's neck, as he must often have done, and drew himself in closer until his head was touching his father's head, the better to hear the words the man was whispering into the neck of the...
His frustration then becoming unbearable, the
lad began to enter himself.
As it were.
The boy began to enter himself, had soon entered himself entirely. And at this, the man began sobbing anew as if he could feel the altered condition of that which he held.
It was all too much, too private, and I left that place and walked alone.
As did I.
I lingered there, transfixed, uttering many prayers.
Mouth at the worm's ear, Father said, "We have loved each other well, dear Willie, but for now, for reason we cannot understand, that bond has been broken. But our bond can never be broken. As long as I live, you will always be with me, child." Then let out a sob. Dear Father, crying that was hard to see, and no matter how I patted and kissed and made to console, it did no. "You were a joy," he said. "Please know that. Know that you were a joy to us every minute, every season. You did a good job. A good job of being a pleasure to know." Saying all this to the worm. How I wished him to say it to me and to feel his eyes on me. So I thought, all right, by Jim, I will get him to see me. And in I went. It was no bother at all. Say, it felt all right. Like I somewhat belonged in there, held so tight. I was now partly also in Father, and could know exactly what he was, could feel the way his long legs lay, how it is to have a beard, taste coffee in the mouth, and though not thinking in words exactly, knew that the feel of him in my arms has done me good. It has. Is this wrong? Unholy? No. No, he is mine, he is ours, and therefore I must be, in that sense, a god in this. Where he is concerned, I may decide what is best. And I believe that this has done me good. I remember him again, who he was. I had forgotten somewhat already, but here his exact proportions, his suit smelling of him still, his forelock between my fingers, the heft of him familiar from when he would fall asleep in the parlor and I would carry him up to. It has done me good. I believe it has. It is a secret, a bit of secret wickedness that shores me up. In shoring me up, it makes it more likely that I shall do my duty in other matters. It hastens the end of the period of weakness. It harms no one, therefore, it is not wrong, and I shall take away from here this resolve. I may return as often as I like, telling no one, accepting whatever help it may bring me, until it helps me no more. Then Father touched his head to mine. Dear boy, he said, I will come again. That is a promise. Willie Lincoln.
After perhaps 30 minutes, the unkempt man left the white stone home and stumbled away into the darkness. Entering, I found the boy sitting in one corner. My father, he said. Yes, I said. He said he will come again, he said. He promised. I found myself immeasurably and inexplicably moved. A miracle, I said.
At approximately 1 a.m. tonight, per this report, Pres Lincoln arrived at front gate requesting he be allowed to enter same. Accordingly, and not knowing what else to do given his position, which is president not an inconsiderable position for him to have, or anyone, I did allow him to enter, even though, as you know, Tom, protocol states once gate locked is not to be unlocked until such time as unlocking is scheduled to it morning. But since it was Pres himself asking, was a bit of a horn dilemma staring in my face. And I also was somewhat groggy, it being late as mentioned above, and having given myself over yesterday to some fun in the park with my own children, Philip, Mary, and Jack Jr., thereby being somewhat tired, and I admit dozing off a bit at your desk, Tom, did not question Pres as to what he was doing here, or something like that. Only when our eyes met, he gave me such a frank, friendly, somewhat pained look, as if to say, well, friend, this is rather odd, I know it, but with eyes so needful, I could not refuse him, as his boy is just interred. So you might as well imagine how you or I might act or feel in a similar way, a similar sad spot, Tom. If your Mitchell or my Philip, Mary, or Jack Jr. were to expire, well, no use thinking of that. Had no driver with him, but had arrived alone on small horse, which I was quite surprised at him being Pres and all. And say, his legs are quite long and his horse quite short, so it appeared some sort of man-sized insect had attached itself to that poor unfortunate nag, who, freed of his burden, stood tired and hangdog and panting, as if thinking I will have quite the story to tell the other horsies when I return, if they are still awake. At which time Pres requested key to Carroll Crypt, and accordingly I handed it over and watched him wander off across grounds, wishing I had courtesy at least to offer him loan of lamp, which he did not have one, but went forth into that Stygian dark, like pilgrim going forward into a trackless desert, Tom, it was awful sad. Tom, here is the strange part. He has been gone for ever so long, is still gone as I write. Where is he, Tom? Lost? Is he lost? Lost in there, or fell and broke something, lying there, crying out. Just now stepped out, listened, no cries. Where is he at this time? Do not know, Tom. Maybe out there in woods somewhere, recovering from visit, indulging in solitary cry. In Watchman's logbook, 1860 to 78, Oak Hill Cemetery, entry by Jack Manders, night of February 25th, 1862, quoted by arrangement with Mr. Edward Sanzabel.
It would be difficult to overstate the vivifying effect this visitation had on our community.
Individuals we'd not seen in years walked out, crawled out, stood shyly wringing their hands in delighted incredulity.
Individuals we had never seen before now made their anxious debuts.
Who knew Edenston to be a tiny man in green, wig askew? Who knew Cradwell to be a giraffe-like woman in spectacles, holding book of light verse she had written?
Flattery, deference, smiles, ringing laughter, affectionate greetings were the order of the day.
Men milled about under that high February moon, complimenting each other's suits, enacting familiar gestures, kicking at the dirt, throwing a stone, feigning a punch. Women held hands, faces upturned, calling one another lovely and dear, pausing beneath trees to exchange strange confidences withheld during many years of seclusion.
People were happy. That's what it was. They had recovered that notion.
It was the idea, the very idea that someone
From that other place.
from that other place would deign to.
It was the touching that was unusual.
It was not unusual for people from that previous place to be around.
Well, they were around often enough.
With their cigars, wreaths, tears, crepe, heavy carriages, black horses stamping at the gate.
Their rumors, their discomfort, their hissing of things having nothing at all to do with us.
Their warm flesh, steaming breath, moist eyeballs, chafing undergarments.
Their terrible shovels laid carelessly against our trees.
But the touching, my God.
Not that they didn't sometimes touch us.
Oh, they touch you all right. They'd wrangle you into your sick box.
Dress you how they wanted you, stitch and paint you as necessary.
But once they had you how they wanted you, they never touched you again.
Well, Ravenden.
They touched Ravenden again.
That sort of touching.
No one wants that sort of touching. The roof of his stone home was leaking. His sick box had been damaged.
They hauled it into the daylight, threw open the lid.
It was autumn and the leaves were falling all over the poor fellow. Proud type, too. Banker. Claimed to have owned a mansion on the...
They yanked him out of that box and dropped him thump into a new one, then asked in jest, had it hurt? And if so, did he wish to file a complaint? Then they enjoyed a lengthy smoke, poor Ravenden, half in and half out, head tilted at a most uncomfortable angle, calling out feebly all the while for them to kindly place him in a less unseemly...
That kind of touching.
No one wants that.
But this was different.
The holding, the lingering, the kind words whispered directly into the ear. My God, my God.
To be touched so lovingly, so fondly, as if one were still
Healthy.
As if one were still worthy of affection and respect. It was cheering. It gave us hope.
we were, perhaps, not so unlovable as we had come to believe.
Please do not misunderstand. We had been mothers, fathers, had been husbands of many years, men of import who had come here that first day, accompanied by crowds so vast and sorrowful that, surging forward to hear the oration, they had damaged fences beyond repair. Had been young wives, diverted here during childbirth, our gentle qualities stripped from us by the naked pain of that circumstance, who left behind husbands so enamored of us, so tormented by the horror of those last moments, the notion that we had gone down that awful black hole, pain sundered from ourselves, that they had never loved again. Had been bulky men, quietly content, who in our first youth had come to grasp our own unremarkableness, and had cheerfully, as if bemusedly accepting a heavy burden, shifted our life's focus. If we would not be great, we would be useful, would be rich and kind, and thereby able to effect good, smiling, hands in pockets, watching the world we had subtly improved walking past, this empty dowry filled, that education secretly funded, had been affable, joking servants of whom our masters had grown fond for the cheering words we managed as they launched forth on days full of import, had been grandmothers, tolerant and frank, recipients of certain dark secrets, who by the quality of their unjudging listening granted tacit forgiveness and thus let in the sun. What I mean to say is we had been considerable, had been loved, not lonely, not lost, not freakish, but wise, each in her own way. Our departures caused pain. Those who had loved us sat on their beds, heads in hand, lowered their faces to tabletops, making animal noises. We had been loved, I say. And remembering us even many years later, people would smile, briefly gladdened at the memory.
And yet,
no one had ever come here to hold one of us while speaking so tenderly.
ever